Hi, I'm Jane. I'm a 20th of a much bigger group of people. And I'm gonna, I feel like this is the bit at the end of the day where it's kind of like, come and meet your artists. We've heard a lot about, kind of art itself as object, and we've heard a lot about people and places it's supposed to benefit, and talked about community. And I think one thing to touch on that maybe links those two things is acknowledging that people can be members of multiple communities at once, and that artists themselves are kind of people who have community and are part of communities, and then sometimes go into communities. And so I'm kind of going to talk really to our process and our notion. Really, I'd focus on what maybe kind of ties into the theme of this conference, that for us, the process and making of work is the thing that makes the place or is part of that. So we don't really kind of focus too much on the kind of object, but we try and focus on the relationship between kind of practice of building things collectively and together, and then where they might then be taken on again by other people, and this sort of sense of maybe a kind of colonization or ownership. Slightly aware that maybe my slides are being a little bit cut off, so I don't think there's anything that interesting at the bottom of them, but I'll point it out if there is. And really for me, oh yeah, so Jordan's head is cut off at the top. For me, this kind of image really is what we're about. It's kind of, we are a group of individuals, but in this is our main image that we use when we come and do talks and do things. We never use individual faces, and you kind of can't really see who everyone is. And actually, some people in this photo aren't even really in Assemble. They were just there on the day, because we're all about kind of building together. And the notion that the act of making can be a really good way to engage people. It's very tactile, it's very visual, it's very speaks to kind of the notion that the built environment should be something that people feel they can shape themselves. And so that's really taken from this sort of Amish community thing, where coming together to build something for the community is enacting and part of your kind of citizenship and social responsibility to a community. And so, I was really struck by Katie's image at the beginning of the New Town Development Corporation, which I don't know if you will notice, but there are a whole load of them in the trees at the back as well. And I was just like, great minds think alike over decades. And so really, I think kind of just bringing up that image is a reminder that, once these sort of ideological collective ideas were really embedded in the kind of the welfare state itself, with the post-war ability to kind of completely rethink not only what was kind of possible, but also really pushing the boundaries about how that manifests in the built environment. And the London County Council employed over 3,000 architects. It was the biggest architecture office in the world, effectively, in the post-war period. Not only does the kind of legacy of the LCC has been slowly diminished over time and almost completely destroyed during Thatcher's time, but it's very rare to find an architect working for local government, and there are people addressing that, like public practice. But we kind of drew on this in one of our projects called the Brutus's Playground, where we were kind of looking at how 20th century ideas could be a way of thinking about how we make spaces in the 21st century. So this was a sort of like a nod to those projects, but kind of a parody of them. So we kind of rebuilt these concrete sculptures in foam, brightly coloured foam, as a sort of comment on the kind of risk-averse society we live in for play, and then what that does to the ability of kind of children to learn and take hold of that play as part of learning how to take hold and behave in your environment in relation to others, but also kind of celebrating that, that these things used to be possible and so should still be possible now. And in a way, that kind of ties into the main body of this presentation, which is really to speak about how we understand that way of thinking is important to enable artistic practice to happen, and to happen for the many. So this is an image we use to try and talk to people about our sort of vision for collective workspace, and the idea that everybody is, in Workspace as a place for small business. So these are all people who need independent, cellular, controlled units that have different facilities, but that actually we want to create a more equitable environment for everybody to kind of collectively overlap and work together that in order to support what can be, a really precarious existence for many, and a privilege for a lot of people to be able to do so. And as you can see from this image, it centers on a big main space, and that sort of manifests in our studio around trying to provide scale for people to be able to work at, which they can't afford to do alone, but also provide the infrastructure, so the kind of the tools, the maintenance, and all of that kind of thing that's kind of incredibly hard to find, particularly where we are based, which is in London. But this should also be a joyful, dedicated, purpose-built place for work, that artists, shouldn't be in these kind of like rabbit warrens of places at the whim of people kind of developing old ex-industrial units, but that we can create good quality new build at low cost to make it affordable for people working, and that it can be joyful and a nice place to be, and that's partly to encourage people to work together, people to share ideas, people to share skills, and people to share networks, but also to extend that creative practice to others, that this is a place where we invite people to kind of come into the community. And so this was our kind of 5th birthday party. We got quite good at doing parties. And you can see that the studio space, it's made out of Kingspan, which is kind of, it's like a cladding panel that does everything. Incredibly cheap, economical, really quick to put up. And so that, the real investment was on the facade, the kind of bit that counts, the bit that was public, and the bit that was the kind of mediator between those who don't know anything about this otherwise private place of work, and a kind of broader kind of community who are interested. So we've been working for a long time thinking about how can we make this actually more embedded beyond a kind of quite closed network of kind of East London creatives. And so Black Horse Workshop was an idea also in East London, but something that we are developing in like 5 locations at the moment, working with the local council and Create London to transform an ex-industrial space into something that becomes an exciting destination, not only for people to make things, but for other people to come to. And this is really based on the idea of the men's shed movement in Australia, which was born out of the kind of acknowledgement that in older age, especially amongst men, that when they lose their partner or close significant others, that keeping them sociable was really a way to keep them alive. But to get them out of their houses, it had to be something that appealed. So loads of community workshops have sprung up where people can come together, and it's really not about the making, it's about meeting other people. And we really sort of thought about this as something that should be publicly funded, something that should be open and accessible, and something that should be in the consciousness that kind of art provision, art production, or I suppose we think of ourselves more in a sort of practical version of that, but that it should be part of a learning experience, as is the swimming pool, the library, the school. And so Black Horse Workshop has become, it's open now, you can kind of go and visit, a place for makers. There are some dedicated studio spaces, so again, it's not just a place where you might visit, but a place where there are people who have a long-term investment in the building in their own studio spaces, and they're often shared, so this is kind of several people at desks. But the important thing is to be able to provide makers with the equipment that they can't afford by themselves or have easy access to. And whilst many people could find cheap facilities, they're not working there with those facilities. And so that also involved creating the business plan for this employing 2 technicians and a director, and we sit on the board to make sure and advise on the ongoing work that's there. And so this means that they have so many workshops, evening ones, daytime ones. There's always technicians, and it's a really kind of place where people who make a living out of this come, but meet people who are kind of complete spirited amateurs. And so what's kind of really important is the way the kind of indoor-outdoor spaces, the public and private mix. And I suppose this is sort of on the left an image which maybe echoes our vision, but in a kind of literal, this is it kind of way. And our ongoing work has involved creating this kind of cafe space, which has outside, there's a market every weekend, other traders come to sell there, but also the people within the workshop. So it's also creating a public front by which people can kind of learn about what's made. And, the kind of a complete surprise, but people who don't really care about what's being made there come and use the cafe. They use it. There's always lots of people working here, meeting friends, and it's kind of just it's kind of become a way of extending that community and extending conversations beyond what the space was kind of first intended for. And I think that's where we really kind of take pleasure in our work, and what we really get out of it is this notion that through experimentation, through challenging the brief, through being kind of ambitious and supporting others to realize that, it can actually lead to kind of stuff that you couldn't even imagine. And I think that's what we really feel like we kind of bring to the projects. That's everything. Thank you very much.